due to COVID-19, All of Us continues to enroll participants and move forward with our mission. Now, I would like to turn things over to our first speaker. Dr. Zeno Franco is an associate professor for the Department of Family and Community Medicine, the Medical College of Wisconsin. With the All of Us research program, Dr. Franco has worked to engage FQHC partners from both community-engaged and data-centric perspectives. Today, Dr. Franco will be discussing the success of enrollment during COVID-19. Thank you, Dr. Franco, for being here.
Good afternoon, Mary, and thank you for that very nice introduction. I'll go ahead and just sort of directly share my screen. So I'm going to be discussing enrollment during the pandemic, and I think this quote sort of sums up this year for us. It's been a tough year, and Robert Frost once said the best way is out is always through. And so we've made it through a hard year with some losses and some successes, and just kind of reflecting on that process. So again, my name is Zeno Franco. I'm the site co-principal investigator at the Medical College of Wisconsin. And as a lot of folks on this call probably are aware, and some may not be, and it's a good opportunity for us to talk this through, we're one of a number of sites nationally that's doing this work through the All of Us program, funded by the National Institutes of Health. And Wisconsin has been particularly successful throughout the pandemic in digital enrollment for the program, with about 6,000 participants enrolled digitally. Obviously, we couldn't do the full physical measures with those folks, but kind of having them in a wait list to come back in and be enrolled fully after that time. We have also worked very hard on retention. So we've tried to treat our participants as genuine partners in fairly complex genomics and precision medicine endeavor. And so part of that is keeping them at the table over a long period of time. And Wisconsin actually has outperformed nationally with some of the highest active retention rates for the program as a whole. And so I'll just try to go through and describe what we've done at the Medical College of Wisconsin in Frederick, kind of from our perspective, what we've seen during this year, and that may be reflected in some other experiences throughout the consortium. And there may be some differences too, which would be great things for us to discuss. So the first thing really was the transition to remote work. So this is a photograph of my PI, Dr. Jeff Whittle, in Zoom purgatory. And so we've all sort of gone through this experience. But it's, you know, for a 16 to 20 person team, depending on the day, was a big transition for us to move an entire team to home-based work with different levels of technology in each home and different levels of kind of comfort with that. So the next thing that you can see here is sort of all of our machines, so the centrifuges kind of offline, and that was the easy part. We kind of understood that we were going to be, you know, not able to recruit and have folks in the program. The hard thing was really that we also took mandated furlough for about 6 of our team members, and so that was a big hit early on that I think affected morale and just kind of we had to work through at an institutional level how we were going to try to continue to perform the important work of all of us despite having a smaller team for a little while. And we were able to bring those people back eventually. Another big thing for us initially was alerting participants, prospects, and community partner agencies about the expected changes, and then trying to figure out how to continue to recruit. And so this is a classic photograph from our team, Jenna's drive-through, getting mailers out to our entire team, and they were actually doing some of the prep for those mailings to go out to keep in contact with participants and also to do recruiting by mail. We also used some of the time early on in the pandemic to do sort of a virtual spring cleaning, and so we reviewed and updated SOPs and tried to do some database cleanup, sort of sharpening our tools while there was some extra time to do that. And I'll get a little bit more into some of this retention pilot works that we did. Very briefly, we had 3 FTE assigned to this retention pilot. One was bilingual. They were able to continue to work on other duties. We had 3 different arms to the retention pilot to try to do some data-driven decision making about what would work best. So mail plus phone call only, and mail only. Not surprisingly, the more robust mail plus phone call resulted in about half of the overall recruitment, retention that we saw from that. And we had about 1,888 folks in the retention pilot. and about 268 completed all the surveys, the sort of follow-up surveys for all of us. We had another 115 do partial surveys. And as folks that are close to the program know, those two things, completed full and partial surveys together, is what we call active retention for the program. And so we had 383 people that were actively retained through this pilot. So that was a good success for us early on. Then moving into sort of the next phase, the second phase of the pandemic, this was June, July, August, and September. So we really worked on maintaining and increasing program awareness, expanding digital outreach, keeping staff engaged, and celebrating wins. And I'll try to unpack each one of those ideas just briefly here. We worked quite a bit on what I would describe as in-reach at MCW and Freighterts, using Infoscope, which is our intranet, to get some coverage of the All of Us program internally. We were also able to get about 10,500 trifolds out to COVID-19 test sites. And so that was a kind of big push to get all those trifolds out there, getting information about the Researcher Workbench to folks that would be interested on campus as well. At an institutional level, from the community engagement lens, not so much from All of Us program per se, but involving All of Us faculty and the program director, really trying to get out to the community to do direct relief, using some of the sort of community engagement know-how from the All of Us team. And so we were very actively involved as early as April 6th, trying to get initially tens of thousands and eventually about 3 million masks out to the Milwaukee metro area in an equitable way. We also delivered tens of thousands of pounds of food relief to families that had been adversely impacted by the economic fallout from COVID-19 through December 2020. So that has been sort of an ongoing community engagement effort, and you can see some of the work on the ground here that has been done. We've also tried to expand our digital outreach during this time period. And so you can see at the beginning, this is Facebook follows. We had about 900 followers at the beginning of the pandemic, and we're up to about 1,300 followers now. We've really worked this through a partnership with a minority-owned media firm, trying to do outreach to folks that are less represented in biomedical research. This has also been a very powerful collaboration between MCW and UW, where we both generate content on shared platforms for the Milwaukee region. And you can see here some of our sort of best performing posts, and not surprisingly, Dr. Bashir Easter is one of the kind of highlights of some of this work coming out of the UW team into the social media feed. We have also been working very heavily on creating some community-driven testimonials, working with both local folks that are community health workers from the Hispanic community and the African American community, again, both sort of locally and nationally. Those 4 videos have been approved by the National Institutes of Health, and we're about ready to start to release some of those into social media and using some other platforms for that as well. So that should be very exciting. And we were able to do a lot of this work kind of during the pandemic when we couldn't get to some other tasks. We have also been very active trying to provide virtual health education sessions throughout the year. You can see some of the speakers. Some of the things that I'm the most excited about is we've tried to present every presentation both in English and also in Spanish in the same month. And so one of the sort of lessons learned there is, if you're serious about doing that, you need to kind of get on the horn early with your Spanish-speaking expert speakers so that we can get them scheduled. And we've set up a dedicated YouTube channel so that content can be viewed and is available after those events. We've worked quite heavily in print media throughout the pandemic to keep All of Us name recognition up there, working largely with print media that faces communities of color, that's minority owned. So Black Women 50 Plus actually highlighted Karen Dotson, who's the program director for All of Us at MCW, working with folks like the Milwaukee Times on the Black, sort of Black History Month, and thinking about the impact of COVID-19 in the Black community, and really tying in all of us into sort of that increased interest around COVID-19, as well as working with the Spanish Journal in sort of this advertorial format where we're asking for some advertising, but also providing access to expert speakers who can be interviewed by some of these media outlets so that they have a chance to dig deeper with us in a kind of relationally driven way. We've also done quite a bit with billboards throughout the region and radio, and just some examples there, different locations throughout the city for bus transfer points and also for billboards. And then another big area of work for us has really been keeping the staff engaged and moving. And so I think, you know, the pandemic hit us all hard. It's been a difficult year. So we've tried to do some fun things, doing Jeopardy online with folks, talking about things like IRB, chromosomes, HIPAA compliance. We actually had the genomics counseling group come out and talk with our team as well, giving them sort of background in Genetics 101. Internally, we celebrated Black History Month with staff talking through different important topics there. We've also really tried to celebrate some wins. So we got about 350 participants at 16th Street Clinic before the pandemic hit, and we were actually able to use the time during the pandemic to really work on EHR data transfer. And so we got those folks' data from the electronic medical record at 16th Street transferred into the appropriate data bucket at Vanderbilt Health. So that's been a big win for us and something that the team was really able to celebrate. And then also just some fun things. So celebrating the holidays, doing a toy drive, and really convening everybody back on campus in a socially distant way, and celebrating departures. So we had staff that left to go to new jobs and back to school, and making sure that we came together as a family to reflect on those moments during the pandemic, again, in a socially distant way, or at least with masks on in this case. And then phase 3, starting to kind of roll forward into thinking about reactivation. So doing some refreshers for training, refresher trainings for staff in HIPAA, IRB, and core values, working through reactivation planning, safety considerations, and the video conference and screen sharing pilot. And so I'll just briefly show some of our sort of workplace hygiene efforts. And then the video conferencing and screen sharing pieces. So we were approved for WebEx and Zoom. Not surprisingly, most participants really prefer Zoom. This is sort of the I think, fundamental learning of COVID-19 is to go where the community is most comfortable. So some lessons learned. Not all of these sessions were successful. About a third still had technology issues. All the sessions for us that were attempted or completed were with women. In terms of demographics, it was about 11% Latino, 33% African American, 33% white, and 23% who declined to state. And we would also try not to kind of overburden the staff with these video visits. So we would do one per day because they were so intensive and required quite a bit of patience. And then finally, sort of phase 4, returning to normal, computer-assisted telephone interviewing, the CADDY pilot. I'll just touch briefly on sort of reopening plans and what we're thinking about for the next year. So for the computer-assisted telephone interviewing, or CADDY pilot, we're helping participants complete surveys over the phone. It takes a long time to do this. It's fairly intensive, but the staff seem to enjoy it. So we had PMT segmentations to message qualified participants and utilize the one-to-one engagement list. We prioritize participants tracked from the retention pilot. Staffer scheduled around the participants' needs. So we were scheduling what would work for the participant, not what worked for our staff. And the staffer assigned to this was temporarily removed from enrollments to accommodate the CADDY time investment. And you can see here that a lot of the sort of computer-assisted telephone interviewing took between 15 and 60 minutes for participants. And we do have some demographic breakdowns there too. And then I think everybody was super excited to start to reopen at the beginning of this year. So we reopened at Curative on January 18th. and you can start to see our numbers increasing there through January and February. In March, we opened the West Bend Center, and you can see our trajectory here right now is over 200 full enrollments since reopening. We have pending sites that we plan to open at Town Hall in North Hills, in Menominee Falls, McKinley at downtown, New Berlin, and Oak Creek, and eventually, hopefully, getting back up and running at the FQHC site at 16th Street Clinic. We do plan to do targeted outreach, scheduling those who were ready for PMMB since April 2020. So we have about 658 folks in that group and another 105 who can be scheduled from West Bend. And we're starting to plan media buys as well for 2021. So including freeway billboards for the first time, bus ads, and doing more Spanish language media in this round. So some exciting future steps there. And just to conclude really briefly, so we have really focused on phone calls throughout this year. Super boring sometimes for the staff, but also has been our largest source of new Health Pro enrollees. Internal campaign was very successful. So we got quite a bit of kind of interest and uptake from the InReach on campus. And we also participated again in these 3 national pilots. And I think that helped us really improve our retention rate and gave us some really important new tools to remotely assist people who are struggling to enroll. And I think that that's a really powerful sort of tool for inclusion as we go forward. And it's a lot of information in just a few minutes, but I want to thank you for your time and happy to answer any questions.
Thank you so much, Dr. Franco, and we will have you come back on at the end for those questions, but you're right, that's a lot of information in a short time, but you did it so well. Thank you so much for highlighting everything that's going on in your community. It's amazing. Next up, I am pleased to welcome Dr. Scott Hebring, who is a research scientist in the Center for Precision Medicine Research at Marshfield Clinic. His current research is multidisciplinary that combines statistical genetics and medical informatics with molecular biology. The goal of his work is to return genetic results to the patient and healthcare system to prevent, treat, and better understand the biological etiologies of human disease. Today, he will be going over updates on the genetic return of results from the All of Us research program. Dr. Hebring?
Hopefully everyone can hear me okay.
You sound great. I'll let Blair
Okay.
pull up your slides for you.
So we had a great opportunity to hear from Zeno about all the things that have been going on, not only within Wisconsin, but also down in Milwaukee. My goal here is to put this into perspective when it comes to information that we're going to return back to our participants. And this one slide is a gross oversimplification of all the hard work that has gone across the country, including within Wisconsin, for the last 3 years, which has resulted in 383,000 patients and individuals, participants from a wide variety of backgrounds who have signed up for the program. And of those, 240,000 individuals have been gracious to provide unique information about themselves, including their electronic health record. Moreover, and as it's more relevant to what I'm going to talk about, is that 292,000 biospecimens have also been collected. That includes saliva and blood, for which we can get DNA. Now, I'm a geneticist and I think about genes and DNA pretty much every minute of my working life. And as a geneticist, I recognize how important our genetics are to who we are. I mean, everyone has a unique fingerprint when it comes to our genetics. Even identical twins, although they share virtually all genetic information, there could still be very subtle differences. So everyone is very much unique, and that uniqueness can contribute to why some of us can get sick and some of us can stay healthy. Next slide. So the reason why we collect all this information, which includes electronic health record and genetic data, is so we can learn what causes human disease. But I think a very important component of the All of Us research program is to give back to our participants. We want to show value for the program, and in doing so, one way we can do this is by providing them their own genetic information. This not only shows value, it also empowers them, because we hope that the information we provide can be important for them to understand who they are, where they come from, but also maybe use that information to better their own care. So I'm really excited to say that in December 10th, 2020, in the middle of the pandemic, we were able to start providing the first genetic reports back to our participants. This was a huge milestone that we all celebrated. Next slide, please. And the first information that we started providing back to our participants included ancestry information. Next slide, please. Now, this is a very, very, very strong disclaimer. I don't have my own genetic data yet. I'm very much looking forward to getting my genetic data from the All of Us program. And because I don't have it, I can't show you exactly what my information is that would be seen through the report that All of Us can provide. But I do have a genetic report that I maybe in hindsight now, about 5-6 years ago, paid $100 to get. The All of Us program, you don't have to pay anything to get this type of information. But a number of years ago, the genetic nerd that I am, I did pay to learn a little bit more about my own genetics. And so what I'm going to show you is that result. Again, this is to emphasize, this is not exactly the way the All of Us program will show the results. It may not be exactly all the same type of information, but it'll be comparative. So next slide, please. And what my genetic report that I paid $100 for indicated that I'm 100% Northwestern European. That's not overly surprising given what I do know about my genealogy. But what I did find from my ancestry report from this other test that I had run indicated that about 15-16% of my genetic information can map me back to the British Isles in Ireland. That was a complete surprise to me. I don't know where it came from. Maybe it was the milkman. Don't know. Next slide, please. So another type of genetic information that we intend to give back to our participants includes some human traits, and we commonly call this recreational genetics because the stuff you learn is kind of fun. Next slide, please. And again, disclaimer, this is not the report that you would get from the All of Us program. This is what I got, but it should be somewhat comparable. Next slide, please. And what my report that, again, I paid for a number of years ago indicated that I'm about a 50-50 chance of being able to sing on pitch. And in reality, I can't sing with a darn. It also says that based on my genetics, that if I eat asparagus, my urine will likely smell bad. And that is 100% true. Another thing on this report says that I have less likely to have upper back hair. And to my wife's happiness, that is also true as well. And even at the bottom of this report, it says I likely have detached earlobes. And I don't know if you can see, but in fact, my genetic report indicates and validates that I don't have attached. I, in fact, have detached earlobes. Next slide, please. So that's the type of information that we're starting to give back as we speak. And it's going to take a while because literally, as I talked in the first slide, that we have over 100,000 patients and participants that we have to return this result data to. But in addition to that fun stuff, the ancestry and the traits, we also intend to provide information about our health. That includes what drugs we may respond poorly to or respond even better to, as well as maybe what diseases we may be at risk for. Next slide, please. But I think what's important to emphasize is that our participants have the power. We've empowered them by this study. Next slide. Because each of our participants have a choice on whether or not they actually want to donate their DNA. They can join the study and not provide a biospecimen. That's perfectly fine. We hope that they do because that information really does help advance the science. And as a scientist and a geneticist, I really look forward to being able to make those discoveries. But if our participants don't want to do it, that's fine. They have the power to decide that. Next slide. But for those participants that do decide, they also have a choice to determine whether or not they actually get to see the reports. And they can join the study, provide a biospecimen, and say, you know what, I don't want to learn anything more about myself. I know everything there is that I need to know. Or some of them can choose to receive those data. Next slide. But those that do choose to see their results, they actually get to decide which results they want to see. Next slide. Which includes the ancestry, the traits, the pharmacogenetics, which means, fancy word, how we respond to the drugs that we're given based on our genes, as well as disease risk. Next slide, please. The most important thing I want to emphasize here, though, when it comes to disease risks, we're not necessarily just giving them a report saying, here's all the diseases you're at risk for, and just kind of letting them go and in panic. This is done in a very thoughtful way, and we're doing this in collaborations with genetic counselors who communicate genetic results to people every day. So all our participants who have a genetic variant that puts them at really high risk of having a potentially devastating disease, that will be communicated through a genetic counselor. And I think it's also important to emphasize that the results that we're going to be communicating to them, the diseases that people may be at risk for, we're only going to be talking about diseases where if we can do something about that disease, if we can do something about it now, based on their genetics, that's the type of information we're going to provide. We're not going to be providing genetic reports for people that have diseases that we can't treat today. Next slide. So if you choose to provide a DNA sample and you choose to see your results and you decide you want which of the results you want to see, you also get to choose, our participants get to choose what they do with their results. If they want, they can share it with their friends and family, and they even have the choice to decide whether or not they want to share it with their care providers. Our hope is that they do share it, but only if they feel comfortable. Next slide. I'll end with this, and I hope this dovetails with our next talk by Dr. Patrick Allaire, in that the whole goal of this program is to learn new things about why we are who we are and why people get sick and everything else. And that's done through science. It's done with scientists in the larger community. But when discoveries are made and we can validate those discoveries and we know that these are strong and important findings, the goal of all this program is to, again, communicate those results back to the participants. So even though we're returning results now about ancestry and et cetera, and hopefully in the near future, information about what diseases people are at risk for, in the far future, the hope is that our participants will learn more and more things as we, as scientists, learn more and more about human disease. With that, I thank you for your time.
Thank you so much, Scott. That was great. And again, keep those questions coming, throw them in the chat, and we'll get to those at the end. But really great information on our genetic return of results. We were all so excited when that launched. So we look forward to hearing from participants that, hey, we got it. And every time that I see someone that mentions in the program that they've gotten it, they're just thrilled. So thank you so much for sharing with that. Next up, we're going to have Dr. Patrick Allaire. He has a PhD in molecular cellular neuroscience from McGill University with a postdoc in molecular cell biology and genetics of model animals from the University of Utah. Currently, he's a project scientist working with Dr. Hebring and Dr. Shukla at Marshfield Clinic Research Institute. Today, he will be discussing his use of the All of Us Researcher Workbench for his studies into the biology of staph infection. I'll have Blair share those slides again.
Okay, well, hi. Thank you, Mary, for the introduction. So this presentation will be about my experience using the All of Us cohort as a replication cohort. And I mean by that, an independent cohort used to attempt to replicate an observation identified in our own cohort, the personalized medicine research cohort. And so the observation here is derived from analysis I've done for Dr. Shukla for his project that studies the biology of Staphylococcus aureus infection. Next slide. So Staphylococcus aureus is a human pathogen that causes serious disease that ranges from skin infection to a septic shock. So the goal of the study here was first to identify phenotypes defined as diagnostic codes in medical record and see if they associate with Staphylococcus aureus infection, which has its own diagnostic code, using the personalized medicine research project cohort. And so, and then second is to validate the association results using the All of Us cohort. Next. So to identify diagnostic code associated with staph infection, I use a technique called pheno-wide association study. And so in this version of the technique, what I did is I screened the medical files of the participant in the PMRP cohort for diagnostic codes associated with staph infection. Next. And so here is a list of our top results. I just want to, we don't look into details here. There's no reason for that. The only thing I want to mention is that all of these are the top association. Most of them, of these conditions, are well known to be associated with a staph infection, which is good because it supports that the technique is working well. Next. But we did find something that was maybe not reported as extensively as the other condition, and this is anemia of chronic disease. And so we were interested in looking to that a little bit further. Next. And so here are some important statistics. So we can see that in the PMRP cohort, the odds of getting anemia if you had or have staph infection is approximately 11 times higher. And so this association was observed more broadly in the Marshfield Clinic Health System with a similar odd ratio, 10.5. But the problem with this as a replication cohort is that PMRP is in fact a subcohort of Marshfield Clinic Health System. They're actually patients from the health system. So it does not, so it's not a good cohort to use for replication. So for that, we turn to the all of us cohort, which is mostly distinct from PMRP. Next. Next slide, please. Okay, so for that, we went to the all of us. I went to the all of us workbench. And what I'm going to do now is describe briefly what I've done to give you a perspective of my experience with there. Next. And so once you log into the workbench, it brings you to this web page. Actually, before you get there, you have to set up your workspace on the Researcher Workbench. And really what this is so it's a file, you fill in a form, which is similar to a small grant. Essentially, you indicate your hypothesis and how you will test that hypothesis. And so here you can see that I have two workspace, one that's done with in conjunction with some of Dr. Hebbring's work, and the one of interest here today, the one with the staph infection. So I'm going to go ahead and click onto that. So next slide. And so in this workspace, you can choose to add cohorts or modify cohorts that are already existing in your workspace. And so with these cohorts, you could also produce data sets to export, but I'm not going to go into that today. And so so because I have this workspace is already pretty much completed, the study is completed, I'll just go ahead and click on the control group here. Thank you. To show you how you set up a cohort. And essentially, once you get to this web page, build cohort criteria, it brings you to, it lets you decide what participants you want to include or exclude. And so in the exclusion, so if you click, let's say, to on the exclusion participant on the right. Next slide, please. Brings you to a web page where you can search for conditions. So in the case of a control, in my case, my control cohort, I want to exclude people that have staph infection. And so you can search for codes that are related to staph infection by just putting the staphylococcal infection in the search bar here. And then press search, and that leaves that gives you a list of diagnostic codes and other information that are found in medical records. And so this is probably the trickiest part that had to deal with, because you can have a pretty extensive list of codes, and sometimes they're like specialty codes that are related to your phenotype or your disease of interest, but in very specific ways. And sometimes it's not something that you necessarily want to include in your cohort. So you have to get familiar with the coding system and how the medical records are organized. But once you figure out that the codes you need for your cohort, you click those, and then you click on Finish and Review, and this brings you back to build your cohort criteria, and then you get some statistics that pops up on the right here. And so that tells you a little bit about the, that describes a little bit the cohort that you have as far as the number of participants in that cohort, or included in that cohort, the number of percentage of female, male, age distribution. In my case, I didn't really need that, but only the total count from this cohort, along with 3 other cohorts that will allow me to calculate the odds of getting anemia of chronic disease if you have a staph infection. So I gathered that data from the other cohorts, and if you, next slide, please. And so I calculated the odd ratios, and as you can see, the association is even stronger in the all of us cohort compared to PMRP. So the odds of getting anemia of chronic disease is about 16 times higher if you have a staph infection, and versus PMRP, which is was put at 11. So this gives us confidence that this association is real, is observed between different cohorts, and not a peculiarity of a single cohort. So we can now use this observation as the basis of a hypothesis for further exploration. So with that, just want to conclude with a few remarks here. I thought the all of us cohort was great for replication studies, and this would be true for any type of association studies that you can think of, really. The process for building cohorts was very well organized and user-friendly. And I think perhaps most importantly, is that it's very accessible. And that's key for research. The timeline to get results is largely dependent on the researcher. In my case, it took maybe 2 weeks to get access to the workbench after filling up some paperwork. But really, it just took me about 2 hours to generate this results, which was pretty critical to decide whether this association was real or not. And this is I think it's in contrast to when you need to go through a third party to generate results, which typically can take you much more time for a number of reasons. So I felt that this was absolutely a great initiative, just because of the fact that you can double check your results really quickly once you're signed up for that. And so I would just like to thank all of us for their work. Thank you.
Thank you so much for sharing, your experience as a researcher. For a lot of us, we see the other side with patients, with participants, and within the community. So it's great to see that researchers like you are able to use our workbench to help your work move forward. And like you mentioned, quickly, something that you were able to gain access to relatively quickly and double check your work. So thank you so much for sharing.
You're welcome.
We are ready to move on to our final speaker of the day, Dr. Dorothy Farrar-Edwards. Dorothy Farrar-Edwards, PhD, is Faculty Director of the UW Collaborative Center for Health Equity, Bialis Distinguished Achievement Professor, and Professor of Kinesiology and Medicine. Her multidisciplinary research addresses the effects of aging on functional independence and quality of life. Dr. Farrar-Edwards is going to discuss the relaunch of in-person enrollment and what all of us is looking forward to in 2021. Dr. Farrar-Edwards, you're still muted.
Wouldn't you know I'd be the person who wouldn't unmute? So
It has to happen every time.
Introduction, and I'm going to take a step backwards and give you a little bit of perspective on how we get to the wonderful data that Dr. Allaire just discussed. It's really wonderful to see findings coming out of the workbench because that's actually why we do what we do. Blair, if you could move the slides ahead. And I want to acknowledge that I had help in putting together this presentation from my colleagues from all 4 of our centers. So I'm going to give you sort of the longer view that supports the presentations that both that Zeno and Scott gave earlier. So the All of Us program is really unique in that it's one of the largest research initiatives ever launched by the NIH, and it's the one that actually is totally committed to full inclusion. So we have, as investigators, been required to do inclusive representative research since 1993. That's the law. The federal law says that our research must be fully inclusive and representative. But that's actually not the case. So All of Us was designed from the outset to make sure that the All of Us data were fully representative of the population of the United States. And in order to do that, they gave us the resources to engage communities as part of our recruitment and retention process. Now, engagement and recruitment is not as simple as it might seem on the surface. So in the All of Us program, we have a number of different steps that we go through to ensure that our sample is representative and fully inclusive. So we do outreach, and you saw examples of that in Dr. Franco's presentation. That's where we're providing materials and information to an audience. So we're sending information out, but it's unidirectional. The information goes out. We don't know how people receive it. They don't have an opportunity to challenge us or ask us questions. One of the great benefits of the All of Us program is that a tremendous emphasis is placed on engagement, and we have the resources to be able to do that. And that's the listening, responding, and supporting the audience. That's the bidirectional engagement. And that's really important because the work that we're doing in All of Us involves a number of sensitive issues. We're asking people to share their electronic health records, to give us their DNA. It's going into a large, huge database that can be accessed by anyone, and we need people to know that their information, first of all, will be safe, but how we're using it, why we're using it, what we're doing. And then the last step is obviously recruitment, which is enrollment in the program. Next slide, please, Blair. So one of the other wonderful things about the All of Us program, and you saw in Dr. Franco's early slides, is that there are a number of groups across the country participating in this, is that the program at NIH actually does not have a cookie cutter approach. So that we are able to develop engagement and retention strategies that are dependent on individual participant journeys. So we're not only doing precision medicine, we're actually learning a lot about precision engagement. And that's really important because this information can be shared with other investigators doing other kinds of research. And so we're a full service research program. In other words, we're not just producing data for the workbench, although that's really important. We're actually producing information on how best to engage. Okay, we can move on to the next slide. I want to give you just a little bit of a snapshot of where we were. So the initial proposals for this program were submitted in 2016 and 2017. We really started, we were up and rolling, and I have to say, as a consortium in Wisconsin, we had added our Gunderson colleagues as a new partner, and we were rolling. We were really doing well. We had kind of hit the rhythm. Our groups were working really well together, and the program was working really well nationally. So last March, pre-pause, we had enrolled 345,000 people. We were a third of a way to our 1 million participants. We had, the predicted number of 271,000 had completed all the steps. And what was even better is that our sample was absolutely, totally representative. So 80% were from underrepresented groups, 52% were from racial and ethnic minorities. And this is really important because there are a number of large data sets available for investigators, but they are not representative. And so this is a first. When we went back to work this May, after all HPOs had been reactivated and had some work in the field, we had actually not lost ground. It was a really big concern is that we were going to go backwards rather than forwards. And so because of the kinds of creative engagement strategies that Dr. Franco explained, we actually continued to enroll individuals And we actually increased the number of people who had completed initial steps. And what was particularly important is that we had not lost any of the diversity that you saw a year ago when the pandemic hit. Next slide, please. And so our Wisconsin experience was pretty much the same. Again, in March, on March 20th, 2020, the report that got sent out from our colleagues at Marshfield said that on that date, we had 12,000, a little bit more than 12,000 individuals enrolled. And through this past year, despite all of the problems, we are up to 14,000. And we've actually led the country, as Dr. Franco said, in active and passive retention. So we're really, really proud of ourselves. It's been a really hard year, but we feel very, very good about the work that's been done and where we're going. Next slide, please. So what did we do during the pause? You heard great examples of from MCW, and I think the work that they did is characteristic of all 4 of our groups. We really, really needed to stay in contact with our community partners. Many of our programs, particularly those in Madison and in Milwaukee, rely very heavily on community partnerships because we're working with trusted groups in the community to forward our message of participation and the value of research participation. And our community partners who are on the front lines of providing much needed services were really slammed. And so we switched from our research message into how can we best support your activities? We're here standing beside you. Remember, we talked about engagement as being bidirectional. Well, this was the opportunity to really prove that we were in it for the long haul and that we support our colleagues in the community. We dropped off hand sanitizers, masks, water bottles, food, provided transportation, but we also continued to sponsor events through the year to support community priorities and keep AOU visible. We did quite a bit of education around COVID, what COVID is, what the vaccines were, on community risk management, because we were trusted sources of information. And as you all know, there's a lot of misinformation floating around there. And it was really rewarding when our community partners came to us, each of us in all of our sites, to say, could you help us? You have information, people trust you, we trust you, would you help us keep these messages flowing, because the community needs the information. The other thing is that our support of our community organizations helped keep them afloat. We did not pull our financial support back during the pause either. And so again, that reinforced the trust foundation of our partnerships. Our community advisory boards, we have 5 active community advisory boards, 2 for the UW group, 1 in Dane County, 1 in Milwaukee. MCW has the community advisory board, Marshfield and Gunderson as well. And the community advisory boards allowed us to keep the pulse of the community in mind. And they gave us advice about where we were going, where we were making mistakes, and what the communities needed and wanted for us. We all became more proficient with Zoom and other online tools. And what we found out is that we actually broadened our reach, and that we had higher rates of attendance for our virtual events than we had sometimes for our in-person events. And so we know that we're going to continue those activities in the future because we tapped into groups that we didn't know were interested in the past. Next slide, please. So what did we learn? Well, we learned that web-based engagement programs were more successful than we ever would have imagined. We learned that using platforms such as Facebook, Facebook Live, YouTube are really important, that there are groups in the community that really look to those platforms for information, that we were a trusted source of COVID-19 and other health information, and we're going to continue to be in this COVID-19 space for quite a while, I believe. We learned that our digital enrollment and retention activities allowed our consortium to experiment with new recruitment strategies and retention strategies. And we also learned, and this is really, really important, that we had to acknowledge there are other bad things that happened in this past year beyond the COVID pandemic. Those were true in the Milwaukee area in terms of the shooting of Jacob Blake, certainly national events, and with George Floyd and Breonna Taylor. And we had to really be in the space of acknowledging the effects of systemic racism, implicit bias, and we had to implement really authentic efforts to promote diversity and inclusion in our AOU program. We couldn't just talk the talk, we had to walk the walk. And I'm really proud that our community advisory boards in Milwaukee and Madison got together and actually made a request of the NIH to actually be more transparent about equity, diversity, and inclusion, and to put more emphasis on that. And we've seen the results of their requests. So we have had our community groups and our community advisory boards have had an impact on the directions of the national program as well, which is really important. Next slide, please. So the reactivation process, again, as Dr. Franco showed you, it is not a simple one. It was an apt picture of multiple file folders. The first approvals only allow scheduling participants with existing healthcare appointments. And the approval was based on the NIH's evaluation of our COVID-19 infection rates for each location, not our local knowledge of what was going on. And Wisconsin did not look like a healthy state. And it took a while to get our reactivation programs approved. Our HPOs are gradually expanding locations and can now schedule appointments for all interested participants who have completed their consents and are PMB ready. Those are the physical measurements and biospecimens. We do pre-appointment screening, temperature checks. We don't have walk-in appointments yet. We used to be able to accommodate individuals who on the spur of the moment said, hey, I want to do this. And our community locations were particularly valuable for that. But we are preparing for in-person engagement activities, and some of our sites are already in the community. Some of us are preparing to go. But even though we're ready and anxious to get back out, not all of our community partners are ready to have us there. So it's a very delicate negotiation and navigation of what the community wants versus our pressure to be out there. And the recognition that we have resources that, again, need to be shared. So if our community partner, our community location says, well, I'd love for you to be here, but we can't, we don't have face shields, we don't have masks, we are not sure that our space is appropriate. We try to provide all of those needed resources so that the partner, our location, is comfortable with having us there. And again, this is a demonstration of the investment in communities as long-term sources of recruitment and retention. Next slide, please. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time with this because you've already heard about the CADI training and the video-assisted enrollment support. We have streamlined enrollment procedures. The saliva pilot sent out mail saliva kits to individuals who had completed their consents but had not scheduled their physical measurements yet, as a hope to bring them in, at least partially bring them into the program. We have an increased focus on equity, diversity, and inclusion, and I apologize for my misspelling. And we have an emphasis in our consortium. We have always gone into this, perhaps because the long-term experience of all of our institutions, Marshfield with the biobank, the MCW with its emphasis on community engagement, UW with many longitudinal studies. And Gunderson, also known for its investment in long-term clinical trials and long-term retention, is that we went in with the emphasis on recruiting to retain. And we got a slower start than some of our other colleagues and other HPOs, but it's paid off with our retention numbers. And we think we have the right strategy. Next slide. I think that was my last one. So, oh no. Okay, so staff concerns. This is where I heard from our other centers. We are really concerned. Our staff are concerned that, we're going out with a full set of rules. We've been well educated by our health systems, but we're going into a community where individuals not practicing CDC or COVID requirements such as masks while attending community events. And we have a number of staff who are really concerned about going into that uncertain environment. And with all the news about the CDC decision about masks and the confusion generated, we can understand why there's still quite a bit of concern. We are concerned about the capacity of our community partners. So we're going to get pushed by the NIH to get out and boost our numbers, and our communities may not be ready for that level of engagement. And the other thing that we've seen, and I think this is true across some of our colleagues in the consortium, is that we lost space in our healthcare facilities, and now we're trying to we're sort of renegotiating, renavigating, and trying to reestablish locations that are not open to us, and some of them won't be open for quite a while. Our UW Milwaukee team probably will not be able to have on-site recruitment until September at the earliest, because they sit inside of another health system. So we're sort of navigating all of those complex agreements in order to get our enrollments relaunched. And Blair, do I have another slide? I don't remember. I've been talking so fast. Okay, so we're looking forward to a statewide communications program. We're restarting tabling at community events. Those farmers markets are calling us, the music festivals. We have new community activities and partners. The UW group is going to be working in Milwaukee with the Hyatt Pharmacy Group. Gunderson is doing a walk with the Warriors at the Doll Family YMCA. MCW is using that beautiful van to drive through communities. We're really jealous of that van as a marketing tool. And I know in Marshfield, those June dairy breakfasts are really, really important, and you're hoping to see some turnout there. So we're looking forward to being in the community and seeing our numbers go up. But we're kind of having to work it out in each of our locations. And I think that's it. So we're really anxious to get back out there, but we're doing it sort of in partnership with the groups that have supported us so well in the past.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. I know that was a lot to fit in, not just for you, but for all of our speakers. And I know we're running a little short on time, but we do have a few questions. So if all of our speakers wouldn't mind just sticking around a few more minutes so we can get some of those questions addressed. Dr. Farrar-Edwards, I know you mentioned a few times Gunderson, who we weren't able to have a speaker, but they are available here for questions with us now that I wanted to let everyone in attendance know. We were just getting them set up to be able to share with us. So while we're waiting for them, Dr. Franco, one of the first questions we had was for you. And again, for the whole group as well. How did your team pivot from in-person to the phone calls only when COVID really first hit and sent everyone home? What was that process like in terms of how long it took, and did you see a lot of lag in that process?
Sure. So I think, one thing just to mention is a lot of that work was really handled by our program managers. So Jenna Coney and Kristen Ertl, really kind of getting the staff ready for those calls. In the first couple of weeks, we tried to kind of lay off, in a sense, not have too many calls scheduled because people were really trying to kind of get their houses ready. I mean, dealing with kids in the home, thinking about how to make sure that, folks were getting to school, an online environment, whatever. So it did take a couple of weeks just to kind of do that pivot and work through the technology issues at everybody's home. I can tell you that, my home office is a disaster and I've got kids running around constantly. So it's tough. But I think as we got into STEP, then we started to increase the expectations and also the staff really got into the rhythm of making those calls.
Great. I do want to address the next question is to our Gunderson team. So I believe Christy is coming on. Just looking to see if she's ready for a question. Don't see her quite yet.
1 second, I will get her added here.
No problem. I can go to our next question. To Scott and again, the whole team. How would you say all of us genetic results are different from others? So other groups like 23andMe. How are those genetic results going to be different?
I think there's going to be a lot of similarities, especially with the recreational genetics and the ancestry component. But what's really going to separate us is when it comes to the health information. At least with 23andMe, and again, I don't want to disparage any one company or anything like that, but the type of test that the All of Us program is running, which is really a whole genome sequence analysis, allows us to capture all the variants that may be disease causing, for example, whereas some of the other commercial companies have very specific experiments that don't comprehensively address entire genes that might be related to human disease.
Hi, Christy. Are you with us now and able to unmute?
Hi, this is Carrie. Christy had to head out, so I will be answering the question for her. She had a last minute issue she needed to take care of.
No problem, we're running just a little long. We wanted to know, you were able to start enrolling participants right before we had to pause in-person enrollment. Now that all of us is back to enrolling participants, what are you doing to connect with the greater La Crosse area and where you can find people, or where people can find you?
Yeah, so as previous presenters have stated, we've been working really hard to try and get our name out there. You know, we launched about 2 weeks, a week and a half prior to the in-person pause. So most of our efforts have been digital. So we worked a lot on getting ourselves out there on Facebook, doing some marketing campaigns with our marketing team through TV and radio ads and just online ads as well. And now we're shifting our focus to our in-person engagement. So we actually are approved to start in-person engagement activities, which we will begin this week. So we will start attending farmers markets in our region. So we're planning to do some in La Crosse, Holman, Sparta, Prairie du Chien, and we'll keep others on the radar as they become available. As was stated, we're also sponsoring the Doll Family YMCA Walk with Warriors on June 5th. We also have some music festivals that small music nights that kind of go on in cities and towns around us. So we plan to attend Moon Tunes at Riverside Park in La Crosse, and again, we'll keep our options open for other activities like that as well. And we also plan to attend as many community festivals as we can. So kind of like the June Dairy Breakfast that Marshfield attends, we have a lot of those in our area as well. So we'll plan to try and attend as many community events like that as well.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for sharing. And our speakers, if you're okay for just a few more questions, we'll try and wrap them up here. We just have a couple for the different speakers. Dr. Allaire, regarding your research, do you think the anemia comes first or infection comes first? It's a very specific question.
I don't, we can't, it seems they seem to, we do have some data looking at that. They seem to coincide in time.
Wonderful. And is there anything currently?
But if one precedes the other one, it's a little bit hard to say at the moment because we don't have that resolution.
Mm-hmm. Is there any data not currently in the database that you would feel very valuable to researchers for future studies?
So repeat that, please.
Yeah. Is there any data not currently in the All of Us Researcher Workbench that you feel would be valuable to researchers for future studies?
Well, I haven't used the Workbench very intensively at this point, so I might not be positioned to say what's missing and what's not. I'm very looking forward to have access to the genetics, which I don't think is online right now. Mm-hmm. But there is a lot of information there that you just have to go look at some point and see if what you're researching is actually there. But there's a lot of information.
Wonderful. Thank you. Dr. Farrar-Edwards, with all the new safety measures in place, what was planning for the relaunch like? You know, who did you bring in? How did you get through that process?
So I wish I could say that I worked on it, but we have a phenomenal team, our program managers and research coordinators. And we started with the CDC requirements and then went through UW actually has I'm sure all institutions had a very, very comprehensive list of precautions. In fact, our staff are not fully on site yet because we still have site limitations and square footage limitations. And so many of our staff are still working off site. And so our research enrollment team is on site doing enrollments, but our community engagement team is still prepping for that. And what they've been doing is contacting all of the community groups that we work with in our community locations where we were doing engagement and enrollment and finding out what the local specific needs are, and then planning to relaunch sort of gradually. sort of, going to the nearer groups first and going out. But we are hoping that we'll be fully in the community. And our full re-engagement plans have not yet been approved by NIH. We're running a little bit behind the other 3 groups in the consortium, but it's been a lot of careful planning and listening to the communities in terms of what people expect to hear and see, when they come out. And we're still seeing quite a bit of hesitancy about face-to-face engagement. I see this across all my research projects right now.
Wonderful. And to the whole group, I've got 2 final wrap-up questions. Are there any plans to offer genetic results that tell folks based on their DNA what exercise and eating patterns are best for them to maintain a healthy weight, or anything along those lines?
I'll try to answer that one. Right now, that is not in the plan, but I can't say that in the future, if we learn better how our genetics can impact our ability to exercise and different types of exercise and more custom things, I wouldn't preclude that being a possibility in the future. Right now, it's not in the plans.
And our final closing question to the entire group again is, what would you say to someone who's on the fence about joining the program?
So I can speak to that. I've actually been on the fence, and that's as a co-I, right? For my site. I come from a minority background. I'm a Hispanic professor. It's actually, in some senses, the Irish in me that worries about the things that should be sort of left to the mystery of the universe. But in the last year, I think actually COVID has convinced me, and Scott will be pleased to hear this, that I need to make that jump personally and become a participant. So I think one of the key things about this is that we're leaving it up to people and communities to decide whether to participate and whether they trust us. But I think the future of medical innovation and new therapies that are going to help our communities is going to be based on this research. And so despite my own sort of personal history and worries about it, I've made that commitment internally. I've actually transferred my care over to the medical college in preparation to make the data maximally available to all of us. So it's a stepwise process, and I'm hoping to be there in a couple months.
So I'm going to jump in. I was an early adopter, which was a surprise to me because I'm very, very concerned about data security and data safety, and I am very cautious about what studies I participate in. But I lost a brother at 43 to heart disease, and my parents both had heart disease, and I'm really worried about my children. So I persuaded 2 of my children to enroll, and I enrolled. Actually, for purely, I believe in the science. Let me say I believe in the science, but I enrolled for personal reasons. I want to understand why. For people, someone who looks like me, who's never smoked and not particularly overweight, not as active as I should be, but why was I hypertensive at 21? I really want to know that. And I want to know what the risks of my children and my grandchildren have, my 2 granddaughters have now. So I enrolled for personal reasons, but I trust the science. I really trust the science.
And I'll step in here too, in that the beauty of the All of Us program is it really is about all of us and what makes us all unique. So if your passion is about breast cancer or heart disease or multiple sclerosis or anything, all those conditions have the capacity to be studied by hundreds of scientists using the information, the DNA, the health information, everything, to begin to better understand those conditions and to do it in a way that we hope and believe protects the individual privacy of our participants. And then again, when we make these discoveries, our hope is that it can come back to us so we can all benefit.
Thank you so much. And we are well over on time, so I want to be respectful to both the attendees and our speakers. So thank you all so much for joining today. If there are any additional questions, please send them to aououtreach@marshfieldresearch.org, and that is in the chat as well.